America is the greatest country in the world. Welcome to our special here on the First TV, Lost Civilizations. This is a massive topic, and I'm fascinated by this for a couple reasons. First, I think it's important that we expand our timeline. It has been said that the Russians think in terms of decades, and that Chinese people think in terms of centuries. Yet here we are in America, we think in terms of news cycles, like 24-hour increments, and now it's even faster than that. We just think in terms of how quickly I need to scroll on Twitter, it's just a constant, that's all we do. We think of the moment that I, of course, happen to be the center of at all times. And that just myopic thinking has led to a lot of anxiety, and a lot of confusion, a lot of mental problems, if I may. You hear a lot in the modern self-help movement that you got to live more in the moment. Live more in the moment. If you worry about the past, that's regret. If you're worried about the future, that's anxiety. So you got to live in the moment, live in the present. And there's some truth to that, but that's not what the Bible calls for us to do. The Bible calls for us to live with a eternal perspective. Colossians 3:2 says, set your mind on things above, not on things that are of this earth. I have a podcast called Politics by Faith. And that's the objective of that podcast. When we started it a couple of years ago, we were in a very, very anxious time in our country politically. So the premise of it was, here are these political things that are going on, but there's nothing new under the sun. So here are some biblical things that happen in the Bible, and also just some general biblical truths that are, of course, in the Bible that we can relate to this political thing that's happening. And the goal was to decrease our anxiety. Right now, in this political moment, we're winning, so maybe there's not as much anxiety, but still, everything that's happening right now has a biblical truth that we need to get grounded in order for things to make a lot more sense. There's still a lot of, maybe not as much anxiety, but there's still a lot of confusion. And I think it's important that we always bring it back to the truth, and we tether whatever political thing that's happening right now, we tether it to the truth. So that's what the point of our podcast is. It's called Politics by Faith. You can listen to it anywhere that you listen to downloads. But one thing that, to this special, when we take time and look back at ancient civilizations that don't exist anymore, it can snap me out of the panic of the moment. It snaps me out of it. And I think, oh man, like these places used to be around. They used to be the top dog. They used to be the empire of the world, and now they're gone. And I think today, wow, like all this is going to burn up. This isn't forever. What we're living in right now. I got to focus more on eternity. That's what matters. I also believe that focusing on past civilizations, and why we're taking time to do it today, will cause us to be a lot more aware of how fragile this country is. Every empire has always thought that they would rule the world forever. They never considered a time when they wouldn't be around, let alone in charge. And we can fall into that trap as well. We've given this example before, usually when we talk about America as the world reserve currency. But the British had the reserve currency for 130 years. And then the French before that, and the Dutch before that, and the Spanish before that, and the Portuguese before that, and the Venetians before that, and the people of Florence before that. They all thought that they would be the world reserve currency forever. And we can fall into that hubris as well. But even that chart right there, that only goes back to the year 1200. Let's go back further than that. The Bible mentions the Philistines. Well, they disappeared 600 BC. Well, how about the Amalekites and the Ammonites and the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Girgashites? No one's ever heard of these. And these are just the ones that are mentioned in the Bible. Obviously, there's countless that never even got a mention. You'll be reading along in the Old Testament, and there'll be this single mention to this nation, to these people that we don't know we never known otherwise, or we never would know otherwise if it just wasn't one word in the Bible. But they all thought they'd live forever. God will give these people who are around for thousands of years, he'll give them one single sentence mentioned in the Old Testament. Now they're gone. They're gone. There's a great poem called Ozymandias, and it's about a man who's traveling in the desert, And this man stumbles across this old statue. It's just the feet of an old statue, like the feet and ankles of this, what used to be this massive, giant statue. And it's a beautiful poem. And the poem ends with, on the pedestal, these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look at my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sand stretched far away. So what this is a king that once had this massive kingdom, and he was telling everyone to look at my kingdom and despair. Well, now it's just dust. Now it's just an empty desert. There's nothing to look at anymore. That king never thought that his kingdom would turn to rubble. But where are the Babylonians today? Where are the Sumerians? It's believed that the Sumerians had the first writing system. They had irrigation, they had weaving and leather work and metal works. They had chariots and plows and pottery. They got wiped out 2000 BC. So you got to keep thinking, keep going back. And then it's like, I don't know who I mock exactly in particular, but just in general, this idea that the only historical reference that we ever have is 1940 Germany. That's it. Like we always go right back to that. We got to broaden the timeline and broaden the people. Go back thousands and thousands of years and look beyond even just Europe. What about the lost civilizations in Asia? Or in South America, the Mayans, the Aztecs, different empires and kingdoms all over the world. And then you keep going. We haven't even gotten to the pre-flood civilizations. Gilgamesh is a fun story. It's worth taking time to read. It's one of the earliest known works of literature in the world about the king Gilgamesh, 2/3 God, 1/3 man, king of Uruk, U-R-U-K, and his heroic feats of strength and massive amounts of hubris. Well, the city of Uruk doesn't exist anymore, needless to say. But the story of Gilgamesh comes up from time to time because it has a flood narrative to it. There's many ancient stories that have a flood story, which some atheists use as proof that the biblical flood with Noah is just another one of these silly stories. They'll point to that and say, the fact that there's so many flood stories proves that that never happened. But wouldn't the fact that there are so many flood stories prove that it did happen? Prove that it is true? If the flood happened thousands of years before these ancient stories, that doesn't disprove the biblical account. If anything, it strengthens it. We have a rabbi coming up to tell us more about that. He'll be our first guest in just a few minutes. Now, we can keep going down this rabbit hole, and we will for the rest of the show. But there's 2 points that I want to keep going back to. First, all of our power and knowledge can be lost. I often mention my favorite building in the world. It's the cathedral in Florence. They started building this cathedral, and when they started, they did not know how to build a dome. Isn't that a beautiful building? Just stunning. Look at that thing. Unbelievable. They did not know how to build a dome. How can that be? That was built. They started building it in 1296. So domes existed. Domes were built 1,000 years before that, more than 1,000 years. What do you mean you didn't know how to build a dome? They lost it. They forgot. It took 90 years before the eventual architect of that dome would even be born. And then he would go on to reverse engineer the dome and reinvent it so that we could build a dome yet again. Rome had marvels of engineering, and then we just lost them. So the ancient Romans were really good they made this really special concrete. They used this concrete to make the Pantheon dome. That's the one with the hole in the middle. They built it in the year 127. They were so precise with their concrete that the concrete was thinner and lighter as the concrete went up to the center of the dome where the hole is in the middle. So it was thinner and lighter so that the whole thing didn't collapse. Isn't that incredible? So they built that in 127, and then hundreds of years go by and Rome fell, 476 AD, and that was it, no more concrete. Now, one of the reasons there was no more concrete is because the empire wasn't as vast and the trading routes weren't as safe and they weren't used. So it was harder to get all the materials into one place, Rome, to mix, to make this special concrete. But after enough time, people didn't know how to mix it anyway, right? Like the concrete guy died. Maybe he told his son how to make concrete, but then he dies and that's it. No one knows how to make concrete anymore. Concrete wasn't reinvented again until the mid-1800s in England. Like, what? What do you mean? What do you mean forgot how to make concrete? People who worship progress, they think that once we unlock a new achievement, then we're good to go and we never go backwards. But no, it all takes work, and it takes intentional work to keep what we have. And that's true for technology, but it's true for our country as well. Just because we have it right now doesn't mean we get to keep it forever. If you forget how we made it, then we'll forget how to preserve it. And we'll forget that it even needs preserving. And then it will crumble and it'll be gone. And it can be a long time before it ever comes back, before we rebuild again. So looking back on lost civilizations can remind us of how fragile our nation is, and our civilization, and the West, and how it needs to be protected. And it needs to be protected with intention.